Good evening everybody, welcome back to the channel. I am Luke, also known as the Yorkshireman Reacts, and I'm going to be reacting to a video that's been requested by Alex. He made a standalone request. He's not one of my patrons who's requested this. He's just, paid the pound and said, this is the video I want you to check out. And it's about the Khmer Rouge and the Cambodian Genocide. So, before I do things like this, I normally give you a quick rundown about what I know about it. So what do I know about this? Well, I know that it happened in the 1970s, I think the mid-1970s. The man behind it was called Pol Pot, and he was absolutely mental. He killed... No, I can't remember the actual number, but I know it's over 2 million of his own people under a communist dictatorship. I know that there is a tree in Cambodia where soldiers would take, toddlers and slam them against it on their backs so that their spines would snap and they would die, called the killing tree. I've seen pictures of it, and there's always, little artifacts around the base of the tree. People have obviously been there to, whatever they've gone there for. Yeah, I know it's absolutely crazy, and it's just one of those things where you hear about it and you're like, wow, that wasn't that long ago, Only just nearly 50 years ago. I mean, it's not that long. I mean, in the grand timeline of history, I would say that World War II happened yesterday. So this happened in that kind of time scale 6 hours ago, kind of thing, So it's definitely something that's relevant and people should learn about. But Cambodia, it's a free country now. People are living there in relative safety and freedom. Still a lot of minefields about. Yeah, there's fields full of mines. There's millions of them still active. Same problem that Burma has and Vietnam. But anyway, we'll get into this. So, as I said, this is a single request made by Alex. He paid the pound and asked for this video, so you can do the same. You send a pound donation to my PayPal or Buy Me a Coffee page and request the video, and whatever it is, as long as it's not a series, then it gets done. You can also join my Patreon from $1 a month and get instant access to the Cheap Super 6, which is 6 ongoing sitcoms I'm reacting to at the moment. Yeah, that's what you can do to support me in that way, because this channel isn't monetized and never will be. Long story, not going into it now. Let's go.
Hello there, just before we get into today's video, why not check out a new channel from me called Graphics? Want to know all the details about some of history's most famous battles and wars? Come join me on Graphics. From Sherman's March to the Sea to Operation Barbarossa, if it's got people fighting each other, we'll cover it. There is...
Was that painting the Charge of the Light Brigade?
A link below. I hope to see you over there. And now, today's video.
The ideology of communism left great scars on the parts of the world where it came into power. Russia, as the Soviet Union, suffered famines as agricultural systems collapsed. Political repression became the standard, with millions being sent off to Soviet work camps known as gulags. After World War II, this repression was extended to Eastern Europe, creating the so-called Iron Curtain, splitting the world between East and West. But horrible as the Soviet Union was to political distance, it was relatively moderate compared to what happened in another part of the world, in the small country of Cambodia.
Oh, there it is. Yeah, you see, artifacts. This, when I look at pictures of it, yeah, there's always something. Killing tree against which executioners beat children. That's such a vague statement. Just try and picture in your head what they actually did. Just imagine a Cambodian soldier with his rifle on the strap on his shoulder because he doesn't need it. Because his target is a 3-year-old boy or a 3-year-old girl. And he'll pick him or her up, dangle upside down by the ankle, or ankles just swing. And imagine the cracking sound of that child's spine. And then the screaming stops. That's what that tree was for. That's what they did with it. I wish they only beat them. But they didn't. They finished the job. Horrific way. I only hope that being that young, like 2-3 years old, so small and underdeveloped, that your spine being snapped that quickly and hard resulted in instant death. I'm hoping there was like a severing of the nervous system or something, but that's just wishful thinking. I bet it wasn't. I bet some of them were alive for a while after.
Our internet debates, and indeed real-life debates, over whether communism is inherently an evil ideology. But today, the story we tell is unquestionably communism at its worst. This is the story of the Khmer Rouge, one of the bloodiest genocides in human history. The country of Cambodia is located in Southeast Asia, nestled between Vietnam, Laos, and Thailand. It has a long history, being the center of the Khmer Empire for over 600 years, but the story of modern Cambodia begins with it becoming a French protectorate in 1863. The French did some good, such as abolishing slavery, and a lot of bad, such as stealing cultural artifacts of the Khmer Empire and exploiting the country's resources, such as rubber, as well as putting down any...
In the context, Simon, really? You're bitching about artifacts stolen. That's all you get on Facebook when a British person starts a discussion about historical matters. They say, oh, well, you went around the world stealing things from... Well, come take them back then. And most of the things that we have from other countries were actually offered to us. They were given to us as a reward for bringing peace and stability to certain areas of those countries. Actually do your research before pointing the finger at the country that ended slavery for Africa. Blaming us. Sick of it.
Revolts from people who disagreed with them. Colonialism came and went. Cambodia gained formal independence in 1953. The government was established as a monarchy, as it had been before the French arrived, under the monarch Norodom Sihanouk, a major figure in the times that follow. From there, Cambodia largely minded its own business, adopting a neutral stance in the ongoing Cold War. But one issue would prove to be impossible to ignore: Vietnam. Cambodia and Vietnam have a long and sometimes troubled relationship. To start with, there were territorial disputes. The Mekong Delta, today the southernmost part of Vietnam, was declared part of Vietnam by the French following their withdrawal. This was disappointing to Cambodia, as many ethnic Khmers lived in the area, giving Cambodia some claim to it. Nevertheless, it was a relatively minor issue, and King Sihanouk accepted the decision in favor of maintaining good relations with his neighbor. From there, King Sihanouk abdicated in 1955, giving the throne to his father, and instead running for prime minister. He won, and when his father died in 1960, he took the title of prince. But it was in the 1960s that things began to fall apart, both from within and without. The most salient problem was the Vietnam War, raging on Cambodia's border. Communist North Vietnam was attempting to take back anti-communist South Vietnam, which was supported by America, and North Vietnamese fighters were using the Ho Chi Minh Trail to supply their operations in the south. The trail ran partly through Cambodia. Everyone knew this, and the United States started pressuring the Cambodian government to do something about it. Sihanouk, still the prime minister, wanted to find some way to stay out of the conflict, and tried to play both sides. Unfortunately, he wasn't savvy enough to make it work, and instead only alienated everybody. He cut diplomatic relations with the United States in 1965 and instead sought economic aid from China and the Soviet Union. He declined to oust the Viet Cong from his territory, but gave the US permission to perform airstrikes on Cambodian soil so long as no Cambodians were killed. However, that didn't go over well, forcing him to publicly retract the statement. Figures in both the United States and Sihanouk's own government started to see him as bit of an unreliable partner. The other problems facing Sihanouk were internal in nature. He led a fractious country with various ethnic minorities and political dissidents. Sihanouk, despite being an elected prime minister, was by no means a Democrat. After winning the elections of 1955, he turned the Cambodian Republic into a one-party state. He demanded fealty towards him personally and suppressed any dissenting factions. One of those factions was the left-wing Workers' Party of Kampuchea, led by a man named Saloth Sar, better known by his revolutionary name, Pol Pot. Since 1962, Pol Pot and his party had been organizing a low-level insurgency in the jungle-dense northeast of the country, home to disaffected minority groups that had been wronged by the central government. Unbeknownst to Sihanouk, they were being supported by the North Vietnamese and Mao Zedong's China. Pol Pot had visited both Hanoi and Beijing, where he allegedly received training in ideology, military, and party purges. But again, Sihanouk didn't know any of this. He had friendly relations with both Vietnam and China and had no reason to think that they were working against him. Sihanouk ridiculed this small movement in the rural northeast, calling them Khmer's Rouges, adopted into English as the Khmer Rouge. Despite Sihanouk's dismissal, the movement grew stronger as politics deteriorated. The war
Interesting to learn where the name actually came from.
in Vietnam spilled over and armed
They still, the people, they called the Khmer, or they speak, the language is called Khmer. I think, yeah.
poured in from China. Then, in 1968, Pol Pot started his war, launching attacks on army posts and police stations to seize weaponry. Pol Pot's army numbered only around 5,000 soldiers, and as such, the war was minor in scope, not really a threat to the central government. But that would soon change, starting with an election in the United States. Richard Nixon was elected President of the United States in 1968. Where his predecessor, Lyndon B. Johnson, was averse to expanding the war across the Cambodian border, Nixon had no such qualms. Along with his Secretary of State, Henry Kissinger, Nixon authorized the use of B-52 bombers on Viet Cong bases in eastern Cambodia. For the next 5 years, America would do to Cambodia what it had been doing to North Vietnam, dropping thousands of bombs all over the country, in villages and even cities, in an attempt to defeat the communist guerrillas there. Sihanouk and the government protested forcefully against American bombing, but Nixon didn't listen, using Sihanouk's earlier statements authorizing the bombing runs as pretext. Anywhere from 30,000 to 150,000 Cambodians were killed, the vast majority of them civilians. American bombs
Based on what's going on in the world right now, we do tend to think in a very immediate, present time sort of way that countries like the United States and us, the UK, just kind of, it's like an uncontrollable urge to get involved in other people's shit. But it's not recent. It's not a recent phenomenon. It's been going on for years. World War II kind of started because we couldn't resist interfering with Germany invading Poland. I mean, alright, fair enough. The end result of that, if we'd have just let them get on with it, would have been very different to, say, if we'd have just let Afghanistan get on with what the Taliban was trying to do, or what's going on in Jordan right now with the Houthis. Mind you, that is sort of essential, because if we just let them bomb the crap out of ships, where's everything going to come from, you know? But it's just another thing that started out of America not being able to keep their huge, egotistical, cocky, dumb American heads out of it, you know? And you just said it there. The majority of the people killed by those bombing raids were civilians. That's another thing. Bombing. Why can't they just target military targets? Airfields and government buildings. Or what places where you know the people that you're trying to stop are. But villages, cities, and I know, villages, what villages in these countries are like. They are just simple, rustic villages, and people there are fishermen or tailors and butchers. I don't think they needed to be bombed.
Completely destabilized the already fragile balance that Cambodia was in. Refugees fled westward. Tens of thousands of disaffected people were pushed into the arms of Pol Pot's Khmer Rouge. Sihanouk's inability to get America to listen further disillusioned members of his government, and it was decided that he had to go. So when Sihanouk left the country on a diplomatic trip in 1970, there was a coup, possibly, though questionably, supported by the United States. A member of Sihanouk's government, a man named Long Nol, was brought into power, and it's difficult to overstate just how bad of a choice this was. Long Nol had been in and out of Sihanouk's good graces before, and he was most well known for violently putting down a revolt in 1967. With a name synonymous with bloodshed, Lon Nol's becoming leader turned many in the country against the government. Lon Nol further weakened his position by making an impossible demand. The Viet Cong had to leave Cambodia within 3 days or face a military response. The Viet Cong, heavily dependent on their bases in the country, obviously did not listen to this, and suddenly there was a very real fear that the Vietnam War would expand to Cambodia. Paranoia flourished, and in this environment, violence broke out against Cambodia's sizable ethnic Vietnamese population. Lon Nol's government supported this violence to the harsh objections of both Vietnams. 3 months after this coup, North Vietnam would invade Cambodia in response, seizing the northeastern part of the country. Lastly, there was Sihanouk. Now in exile, he went to Beijing to meet with Mao Zedong, who pushed Sihanouk to make an alliance with the Khmer Rouge. Sihanouk, determined to get revenge on the government that had betrayed him, did so, declaring that Lon Nol's government was dissolved and that the Khmer Rouge were now part of the legitimate government. Sihanouk had done this before, counterbalancing right-wing factions with left-wing ones, just as he tried to do with his foreign policy. Now he threw his lot in entirely with Mao Zedong and Pol Pot. With that done, North Vietnam handed over the territories it had captured to the Khmer Rouge. They also started training their troops and supplying them arms. In one fell swoop, Pol Pot went from being a lowly insurgent to leading an army of tens of thousands, controlling half of Cambodia's population and being supported by North Vietnam, China, and the former Prime Minister. He probably couldn't believe his luck. America provided support to Lon Nol's government against the communist.
That level of sheer power just falling into his lap like that. So dangerous.
Sending troops over the border and using airstrikes the way it had before. But it was no use. By 1972, America wasn't even fighting in Vietnam anymore, and by 1973, the bombing run stopped, leaving the Cambodian Republic to fend for itself. Cambodia's armed forces suffered much the same problems as South Vietnam's: corruption, low morale, high rates of desertion, and war crimes committed on suspected communists. Lon Nol bungled his way through politics, rigging an election to remain prime minister and demanding personal loyalty, much like Sihanouk had. As such, they were ineffective against the Vietnamese-trained Khmer Rouge. During this time, ominous reports started surfacing in areas under Khmer Rouge control. Stories of forced relocations of villages or summary executions for things as simple as asking questions. The reports grew louder following North Vietnam's withdrawal from Cambodia to...
Not that dissimilar from China. No? The Chairman Mao. If you so much as questioned him, you were shot. Simple as that. Isn't communism fun?
Conquering South grew louder. Locations of villages or summary executions for things as simple as asking questions. The reports grew louder following North Vietnam's withdrawal from Cambodia to focus on conquering South Vietnam. The next 2 years would see the Khmer Rouge besiege the capital, Phnom Penh, which was filled with starving, desperate refugees from a population of 600,000 at the start of the war to 2 million in its final days. By January 1975, it was clear the city would fall. America evacuated its embassy by helicopter in April, a feat it would perform again in Saigon the same month. Lon Nol fled the country, leaving his successor to negotiate the surrender of the capital. The civil war was over, and as many as 300,000 Cambodian civilians were dead. But no one could have imagined just how quaint that number would seem in hindsight.
Yeah.
After the fall of Phnom Penh, the Khmer Rouge evacuated every person in the city, claiming that there was an American bombing raid coming. This was not true, but nonetheless 2.5 million people, including hospital patients, were taken from the city and marched into the countryside. 20,000 people died on the march. The reasons for emptying Phnom Penh were both ideological and practical. Phnom Penh, as the capital of the old government, was a symbol of the system that the Khmer Rouge wanted to destroy. It was also the seat of power for many old government officials, as well as the center for alleged American intelligence networks. But it was largely ideology that drove the decisions of the new government. Pol Pot believed in a kind of self-sufficient agrarian socialism in the same style as his sponsor Mao Zedong, and he was hell-bent on making it happen. So one of the first things that the Khmer Rouge did was empty the cities of Cambodia, sending the urban population into the countryside to work on collective farms. When they reached these farms, individuals were told to write a short essay about themselves, their life, what they believed, and what they had done before the Khmer Rouge came to power.
Well, something else has just come to me as well, now that he's mentioned that. Pol Pot, he killed... So when he went into these... Well, not him. When he sent his troops into these towns, round up the people, he ordered them to kill anybody wearing glasses, anybody who worked in an office, anybody who had a significant intellectual background, so if they were well educated. He wanted all the intelligent, successful people dead, in the name of communism. Well, no, what am I doing? No, that is communism. Everybody has to be the same. So, no one's smart. And I'm not entirely sure, but I think he also had a similar policy for people that were very dumb as well. If you were either very stupid or very intelligent, you were dead, basically. But that might not be accurate. It might just be the smart people, the intelligent people. But that's something he did. If you had a pair of glasses, if you wore glasses in Cambodia in the 70s,
about themselves, their life, what they believed, and
you were getting
what
shot.
they had done before the Khmer Rouge came to power. A tiny minority with technical skills were sent back to the cities for industrial work. Those who were considered elites or had been involved in the previous governments were often immediately killed or sent to labor camps. The rest remained on the farms. On these farms, Cambodian citizens were expected to work in rice fields without pay. That was because there was no pay to give them. The government had abolished currencies, believing they would lead to corruption. Workers were given clothes, rations, housing, and that was that. Based on this, some have characterized the Khmer Rouge's government as a slave state, but even forced labor like this seems moderate compared to everything else. Khmer Rouge militias operated with impunity, regularly killing people who were, by their judgment, bad elements. When people were killed, they were often buried by the rice field, using their bodies as fertilizer. A common statement to those executed was, "To keep you is no profit, to destroy you is no loss." People were killed for appearing intellectual.
That is such a... To kill you is no profit, to keep you... No, to keep you is no profit, to kill you is no loss. That is... seeing your people as truly expendable.
As fertilizer. A common statement to those executed was, "To keep you is no profit, to destroy you is no loss." People were killed for appearing intellectual, which could be something as trivial as wearing glasses. The government also targeted ethnic minorities, including Chinese and Vietnamese.
People with connections to former Cambodian government, yeah, he said that. Professionals and intellectuals, yep. So if you were a nurse, a teacher, police officer probably, if you were intelligent, you'd be killed. Yeah. Axes picking wild fruit or berries were seen as private enterprise, punished with death. Picking wild fruit seen as a private enterprise. They were just starving, and they wanted a little bit of extra food. Or maybe, they could sense their bodies because they were probably just being fed the rice that they were farming. You can feel when your body lacks something, when it's low on something, a mineral or a vitamin. You can feel it, you've no energy. I mean, have you ever tried to just live off, like, a particular vegetable that's just so bland, like lettuce? Try living off lettuce for 2 days, and you'll feel it, because there's no sugar going into your body, or salt, or protein, or fat, or many calories. That's probably what they were doing. They were thinking, if I pick a few blueberries or strawberries, it'll give me a boost and I'll be able to work harder. But they killed them for that, because they thought they were setting up a private enterprise. How? There was no money. They abolished currency. See, this is how ridiculous communism can be. Killing them for picking berries, fearing that they're trying to start a private enterprise. But what are they going to sell them for when you've abolished currency? As I said, the man was an absolute fucking psycho.
Who had remained following the Civil War. When it wasn't the soldiers killing people, it was the forced labor causing exhaustion, the inevitable starvation that came with forcing inexperienced city dwellers to start farming, and the proliferation of diseases due to a lack of medicine. The government had banned the import of Western goods to promote self-sufficiency. In 1976, Pol Pot declared the establishment of the Democratic Republic of Kampuchea, with Sihanouk as its head of state. But Sihanouk was aware of what was happening in the countryside and was increasingly uncomfortable with it. He resigned and was subsequently placed under house arrest. He would remain there for the rest of the Khmer Rouge's time in power, which would not be very long. But, well, a lot can happen in 3 years. The government empowered the party's secret police, the Sandoval, to start rounding up suspected counter-revolutionaries. People were arrested on the merest suspicion of dissent, and entire families were imprisoned along with the suspects. Most of the time, prisoners were not told why they were there and were punished for asking. The government also began building a network of prisons and labor camps to house them, the most infamous of which was S21, or Chol Sleng, a former high school. Chol Sleng is today a museum dedicated to the memory of the atrocities committed there. As many as 20,000 people passed through S21. Of that number, only
20,000 people passed through that prison. Only 12 survived. Can you imagine being one of the 12? I don't know if I would feel incredibly lucky or guilty to be 12 of 20,000. I mean, I'd love to know the odds on that. The likelihood of your being one of the 12 out of 20,000. I don't know how I'd feel, if I'd be glad or...
are known to have survived. 7 adults, 5 children. They've described their experience.
5 of them were children. Interesting. No wonder any children survived this at all.
And there was an incredible amount of evidence.
By the way, whenever I watch documentaries or hear about things like this, genocide, war, ethnic cleansing, whatever it is, I don't think about adults. I always think about the children. Because adults, I mean, don't get me wrong, it's awful that things like this happen and they kill people. And the adults get killed. But, we're adults. We're better built to deal with these things. Whereas children, and I know for a fact that it happened in this, the children that suffered through this saw their parents killed first. They had to watch their parents be killed, and then they killed the children after. Make sure that there was no retaliation. So, yeah, especially this. But any kind of historical event similar to this, I don't think about the adults, I just think about the children, and nothing else. All I care about. That's the only part of these stories that gets to me.
And you must be warned, the picture they paint is not pretty. Prisoners were kept in classrooms, converted into large cells, shackled to the floors, and forbidden to talk to each other. The conditions were unhygienic. Disease and parasites, such as mosquitoes and lice, were rampant. Each inmate received minuscule amounts of food consisting of rice and water, and next to no medical
Rice and
attention when they
water.
caught disease. Many were sleep deprived, which was often done by guards as part of the interrogations. And the interrogations made this look mild. Every prisoner was routinely tortured using beatings, electric shocks, hot metal rods, and stress positions. They were cut with knives and had fingernails pulled out. Alcohol was thrown on their wounds. They had
Oh,
plastic bags pulled.
God. Right, do you know what? I don't know if you... Right, it might... You're going to think I'm sick, but... Growing up, I remember, as I started getting older, me and my mates, we used to play a game where we used to fantasize doing things to people that we hated the most. Like mass murderers, rapists, paedophiles. We used to, discuss how we'd torture them. And I always was the person that would say, I'd tear their skin off and then pour salt or alcohol on it. But to hear that they actually did that, oh my God. To innocent people as well, is what I'm getting at with that. Yeah. Tearing their fingernails out. Pouring alcohol. I mean, just think back to when you were a kid at school. If you fell over in the playground and put your knee open. The mere sight of the first aider moving away from me towards the first aid box was enough to put the fear of God into me, because I knew what was coming. I knew that sadistic was going to get one of them wipes. You know the wipes I'm talking about, one of those antiseptic wipes. And as soon as it touched your wound, felt like you'd just knelt down on the surface of the bastard sun. So imagine what that would have felt.
And had fingernails pulled
like.
out. Alcohol was thrown on their wounds. They had plastic bags pulled over their heads, waterboarded or held underwater for long periods of time. Some doctors in the prison's medical unit performed medical torture, removing internal organs without anesthetic. The notional purpose was to extract confessions and names of other enemies of the people. When confessions were given, the prisoner was sent to the killing fields, a term coined by Dith Pran, a Cambodian journalist who escaped the regime. The killing fields were not one place, but a system of 20,000 mass graves throughout the country. These were where the vast majority of the regime's victims died, executed after being sent there from the prisons or the collective farms. Prisoners were often killed with metal hooks, including axes, scythes, or even hammers and nails.
Look at that. The picture of it in itself is awful, but just look at him. How skinny he is. He doesn't even look human. Looks like a dog that's been skinned. Until you see his head and you see that he's got hair. But if you just, cover that bit up and just look at the body, you'd think it was a dog that's been skinned in a Chinese dog meat market. That looks like a picture of a child. I hope it's not.
Bullets were just two hooks from the prisons or the collective farms. Prisoners were often killed with metal hooks, including axes, scythes, or even hammers and nails. Bullets were just too expensive. Not even children were spared the brutality. Young teenagers and even some under the age of 10 were often recruited to aid in the regime's actions, either carrying out executions or serving as child soldiers. Inside the prisons, children and babies were not normally kept as prisoners. Instead, they were brought outside, where they were held by the legs and swung against the sides of trees until they were dead. Medical staff used children as assistants, having them perform operations on non-consenting patients. This went on for 4 long years until external forces would put an end to it. Pol Pot had distanced himself from his erstwhile allies, the Vietnamese, ever since coming to power. Their governments had been chaotically hostile to each other ever since, with Cambodian forces intermittently launching attacks over the border. Pol Pot himself was also acting erratically, calling for friendship one day and accusing the Vietnamese of secret plans for expansionism the next. Vietnam proposed multiple times for the two countries to talk it out, but Pol Pot refused every time. So Vietnam made the decision to remove him by force and launched a full invasion on Christmas Day 1978. The invasion was incredibly one-sided as the better-equipped and well-experienced Vietnamese army overran the Cambodian forces in just 2 weeks. On January the 7th, 1979, the
Jesus Christ, and oh God, it took them 2 weeks. 4 years this was allowed to go on. 4 years. And it took the Vietnamese army 2 weeks to stop this. When all was said and done. 14 fucking days. To end 4 years of genocide of men, women and children. Killed with blades and knives and metal rods because bullets were too expensive. Children were killed by swinging them against trees until they were dead. For 4 years. And it took 2 weeks to end it. Why did it take that long? Never mind why did it take Vietnam that long. This is one of them rare instances where I say, why didn't we get involved and stop it? If it took the Vietnamese army 2 weeks to stop all this, it'd have taken us about 1 fucking day. We had the best army in the world at this time, or one of the best. The SAS would have... I think, when was the siege of the Iranian embassy? That's when they became public knowledge. That was around this time, I'm sure it was. But, you know, us, America, a couple of other allied countries in the Commonwealth together, we'd have had this done and dusted within days. Why wasn't that done? We must have known this was going on. We must have. There's no way that this can happen. And the only people that are aware of it or have any knowledge of it are the people doing it or suffering from it. That cannot be the way.
Vietnamese army entered Phnom Penh and declared the Khmer Rouge government to be dissolved, establishing a puppet regime and bringing the murderous time of the last 4 years to a close. The death toll of the Cambodian genocide is estimated to be anywhere from 1.5 to 2 million people, around a quarter of Cambodia's population at the time. Some estimates go as high as 3 million, although those are generally considered to be exaggerations. Of those that died, approximately 1.3 to 1.4 million were murdered, their bodies dumped in mass graves in the killing fields. Some Cambodians were lucky and managed to escape over the borders to Thailand or Vietnam, but generations of people have never returned. The severity of the atrocities took time to settle in. The Khmer Rouge actually maintained their seat in the United Nations long after being deposed, mainly due to the new government being under Vietnamese management and for Sihanouk's advocacy for it not to be recognised. China, which had maintained support for the Khmer Rouge the entire time...
Okay, I didn't know that. The Khmer Rouge kept their seat at the UN for many years after this happened. How the fuck is that possible? The United Nations purports itself to be this holier-than-thou moral arbiter of the world. You know? They're the ones that you see going round places in Africa that are going through civil war in the big white military vehicles with UN written on the side. There to help. Yet they'd let them keep their seat. By the way, the United Nations is a disgusting, corrupt organisation, and it should be dissolved. And so should the World Economic Forum, the World Health Organisation, European Union, the League of Nations, all of them. They're all disgusting. Take a look at what was added to the bill and proposed to be added very soon at the latest meeting in Davos last week. Just go through it. In fact, there's a very good video on it. I will link it in the description below, if I remember. Go and watch that video and take a look at what they're planning to do to us. They're planning to implant every single person living in a country under UN or WEF or WHO membership with a device that will be able to track every illness that you have and then immediately schedule an appointment for you. Now that might sound like a good thing, but it also keeps a track of your medical history, so whether or not you've had the COVID vaccine, and then if you want to go to a different country, they just, like a dog with a microchip, they'll scan the device, and if it says that you've refused to have it, you can't go to that country. And that's just the beginning. But I'll link the video and let you watch it yourselves. Probably won't, but...
Actually invaded Vietnam over Vietnam's invasion of Cambodia, but Vietnam bloodied their nose, and China simply left, claiming that they'd made their point. Nevertheless, there was disagreement. Many left-leaning Western academics, such as Noam Chomsky, initially downplayed the atrocities committed in Cambodia, calling them anti-communist propaganda by hawkish conservatives who were trying to save face over the failure in Vietnam or to justify America's attempts to contain communism. The outright denial ceased when the mass graves, such as Noam Chomsky, communist propaganda by hawkish conservatives who were trying to save face over the failure in Vietnam or to justify America's attempts to contain communism. The outright denial ceased when the mass graves were discovered, but the point to be made was that America was the catalyst for any bloodshed. Reality, though, is more complex than that. It is true that it was America's bombing campaigns that pushed the country over the edge, but it is also true that the country was sitting on a knife's edge to begin with. It was the breakdown in peaceful society, plus the political machinations of self-interested leaders, that paved the way for one of the most brutal regimes in human history. Following the end of the Khmer Rouge, the government and Pol Pot retreated to the jungles in the west of the country, continuing an insurgency against Vietnam. Some factions of the Khmer Rouge were even trained in Thailand by the British Special Air Service, which just goes to show how completely unprincipled the Vietnam War actually was. Peace talks began in 1989 and a treaty was signed in 1991. In 1993, the monarchy was restored with who else but Sihanouk as king. But Pol Pot refused to stop fighting, splitting with Sihanouk and resuming the insurgency that he had begun 30 years earlier. Around this time, several leaders in the Khmer Rouge had had enough, and Pol Pot was betrayed and imprisoned by his own men before he died in April of 1998. Within a year, the group's major members had mostly
died in his sleep. The man behind all this died peacefully in his sleep. He should... Well, I won't say what I think have happened to him, because I definitely will get into trouble for it, because it's disgusting. Like, really dark. It's in my mind right now, on the tip of my tongue. And if you think it's something as simple as he should have been tortured to... No. No. It's much worse than that. Much worse than that. Oh. In fact, no. I'm not even gonna drop a hint, because yeah, not only might I get into trouble, well, no, I don't care. I don't care how it makes me look, because even what I think should have happened to him isn't enough. Again, for what he did to the children, killed them. Had them killed by being swung against trees until they were dead. So what I think, how he should have been killed, don't even begin to cover it.
Surrendered, and by the turn of the century, the Khmer Rouge had effectively dissolved. The legacy of the Khmer Rouge is one of shocking, unrelenting violence. Today, several major perpetrators of the genocide have either been convicted of crimes against humanity or died in custody while waiting to be convicted. The head of Tiol Sleng died in prison while serving a life sentence, a better fate than most of his victims received. Most Cambodians are today too young to remember the genocide of the 1970s and are more focused on current problems. Cambodia still isn't very democratic, and it suffers from poverty, plus the occasional controversy surrounding a cultural artifact. But to the few still old enough to remember, those must be problems that are rather nice to have.
Actually,
Hello.
that's quite
There, just before we get into today's video.
fuck off. That's quite a sobering thought that he ended on there. The current generation living in Cambodia, poverty, and the other things that you mentioned probably are quite nice problems to have, because people living there, they know just how bad things could get. What the true meaning of your country having problems can be. So, yeah, I'd take a bit of poverty and my country not being entirely democratic over some fucking mental dictator killing 2 million of my people in a 4-year period. Definitely. So, yeah, that was a request. I mean, in terms of detail, there was nothing included in that video that I couldn't have got off a Wikipedia page about the genocide, but I didn't pick the video. But I would like to see a documentary like this with a bit more detail. So, you know, where most of it happened, the numbers, time frame, stories of any resistance groups, if there were any. You know, if any, like a little group of rural villagers managed to get a hold of a few guns left behind by soldiers and they tried to fight back. Things like that, you know. Stories like that aren't impossible. It can happen. So anything like that I'd love to hear about. So if there's a video like that exists, then let me know. I'd like to see it. But in terms of this story and its relevance and who it's relevant to, I don't think it's going to be on this channel in a personal sense. So I don't think any of my audience comes from Cambodia. At least not recently. Mostly European. But yeah, as I said in the beginning, this happened in the 1970s. Very recent. And in the grand timeline of history, I'd describe World War II as something that happened yesterday. Titanic happened a few days ago. The American Revolution happened last week. Henry VIII happened a couple of weeks. You know, so on and so on. I could go on. This happened a few hours ago. Very recent, very relevant. There'll still be people alive that probably went through it. Well, there will be. Not every single person in the country was killed. It was a quarter of the population. It's a lot, but not all of them. So there'll still be people that are alive who went through this, probably worked. I don't mean worked as in I'm saying they didn't do any work. I'm saying, no, they were basically just being... It's like a soft form of torture, you know? Being forced to do hard labour under a communist regime. But yeah, people that worked in the fields, the rice fields, people that were just there when this was going on. So, as long as that's the case, something like this is immediately relevant. It's the same with World War II. As long as there is one surviving veteran of any country still alive, it's something that should still be, you know, a topic and talked about and thought about. And for, if any reason, to make sure that this never happens again. And, you know, it's also, I think, important that everybody in every country uses what little power they have left as citizens in terms of who you vote for, who you promote, which political people that you share on your social media accounts, whatever you do that can influence political power and point other people in certain directions, that we do all those things to ensure that communism never takes off in any other country ever again. Because you look throughout history at communism and all these genocides, I mean, just one would be enough, right? But it's not just one, is it? Burma would be a good enough example why communism should never take off in the West. How people are treated there. The Burmese army get on their trucks, go through the villages, take all the young boys, take them back to the army training camp, and turn them into soldiers, and the parents never see them again. In the middle of the night. If the parents protest, they shoot them. That's Burma. Covered in landmines, people getting their legs blown off all the time. Mostly children. Children like to play in fields and trees in the jungles. Cambodia, Russia, China, North Korea. Look at North Korea. North Korea is, like, ridiculous. So, yeah. We go on about things that are our enemy in the world, and there are many different things that we need to be careful of and that are dangerous to us. And I truly believe communism is very high up on that list. I'd put it up there with nuclear bombs, super viruses, and cancer. And I don't mean dangerous to individuals, I mean to entire populations. So in that sense, I would put communism on a par with the nuclear bomb, cancer, malaria, AIDS, all those things. Look how many people it's killed in just one country in this documentary. There's an example. 2 million people gone in 4 years. So, yeah, I'll end this off by just saying communism. Avoid it, denounce it, destroy it. That's all I've got to say. Thanks for watching. Good night.